Now that we've covered the basics for an alternative date to the birth of Christ, we can begin to question these so-called ancient languages that permeate our timeline before the Dark Ages. Many are not aware that the Hebrew language, in fact, was created in the late 19th century. The Hebrew script did exist. However, the language itself died out somewhere between 100 and 200 AD of the mainstream timeline, according to historians. How could Hebrew as a language die out 200 years after the birth of Christ? So Jews, for most of modern history, weren't even speaking Hebrew. Are we to believe that they had these Hebrew Bibles and books, yet they couldn't even speak the language? It wasn't until the end of the 19th century that the Hebrew language, that hadn't been spoken in over 1,000 years, was revived by Eliezer ben Yehuda. Reportedly, Ben Yehuda had to invent hundreds of words in order to compile the first modern Hebrew dictionary. How did he do this? Well, apparently, according to him, he used Arabic to invent the Hebrew language. Quote, "In order to supplement the deficiencies of the Hebrew language, the committee coins words according to the rules of grammar and linguistic analogy from Semitic roots, Aramaic, and especially from Arabic roots." End quote. Wait, especially from Arabic roots? Quote, "Concerning Arabic, Ben Yehuda maintained that Arabic roots are ours. The root of Arabic were once a part of the Hebrew language, lost, and now we found them again." End quote. According to Ben Yehuda, Arabic was literally Hebrew's sister language. Yet it would seem that modern Hebrew is derived from Arabic roots. There's even a photo of Ben Yehuda copying Arabic words from a dictionary and just changing them up slightly. Given what we know about the altered timeline and that a majority of prime sources before the 1500s have been conveniently destroyed, we could safely ask the question, did the Hebrew language ever even exist prior to Ben Yehuda's invention? The official narrative tells us that Hebrew existed 1,000 years before Christ in its earliest form, and gives us what they claim to be evidence of that in an artifact found in Jerusalem in 2008. It's called the Khirbet Qeiyafa Ostracon, and to me, it looks nothing like the Hebrew script we know of today, and the one that existed in the Middle Ages. As you can see, this artifact that is supposed to suggest that ancient people spoke Hebrew seems more to be proof that they were using a Phoenician-inspired alphabet, which if you've been following the channel for some time, know is inspired by the Ogham Ogham Gaelic alphabet of ancient Ibernia. They tell us that Hebrew and Arabic come from Aramaic, but let's consider this. Why didn't Ben Yehuda just use Aramaic? Also, some will say that Aramaic still exists today, but most Jews throughout history did not speak Aramaic. Only Arabic and a few variations of Aramaic survived into the modern day. However, Aramaic today has around 500,000 speakers, whereas Arabic has 380 million speakers. Arabic also serves as the liturgical language of more than 1.9 billion Muslims. Aramaic is not even a single language. It has 150 different dialects, and none of them sound like the language of the Babylonian Talmud or the language spoken by Jesus. So what language were the Jews speaking after the Hebrew language supposedly died out? Quote, "By around 800 CE, most Jews within the Islamic Empire, 90% of the world's Jews at that time, were native speakers of Arabic." End quote. Arabic began to be spoken in mainstream history at the same time as Aramaic. Yet within 1,000 years, despite it supposedly not having a written script until the creation of Islam, immediately became the main language of the Jews in the 8th century. The Jews in Spain, Portugal, and southern Italy all used Arabic and used it for nearly everything they wrote, even religious works. Synagogues also emulated mosque architecture. So we have a major problem. Are we really supposed to believe that the Old Testament and Talmud were originally written in Hebrew when no one could even speak it as a language? As Ben Yehuda puts it, Quote, 60% of the root words of Hebrew are Arabic. The Jewish were speaking Arabic for 2,000 years. End quote. Imagine you were creating a new made-up language, and the majority of the root words from that language are English. Well, you essentially are speaking a dialect of English. It would make more sense that instead of Hebrew and Arabic being derived from Aramaic, it's actually the other way around. Scholars like to play games with different handwriting scripts, where Aramaic is simply a different dialect, yet is very similar to Arabic. Hebrew, throughout history, was more used for state documents and in law, being used more so as a literary language. The true source is not modern Arabic, but an older lost version of Arabic. This older root Arabic is the root of not only the Aramaic languages, but several other languages. What is this ancient form of Arabic, and where did it originate from? This primordial Arabic was partially erased during the Crusades, most notably those which occurred in what later became known as Constantinople. The original books of the Bible pertaining to Iessa, or what could be termed the original pre-Vatican or Gnostic Christian books, were actually written in this older form of Arabic, not Hebrew, Greek, or Aramaic. These pre-Christian books contained the knowledge and wisdom of the Iberian Phoenicians and were the foundational elements of the Church of Iessa, the true original Catholic Church that stemmed from Ireland, later to be categorized under the blanket term of paganism and then be snuffed out by St. Patrick, who was really the invented personification of the events that took place during the Crusades around 1300 AD, not 300 AD like the St. Patrick fiction suggests. To hide this truth, that these original books were written in this ancient Celtic Arabic language and make way for their new narrative, the Vatican assembled crusades to systematically locate and burn all existing remnants of the original church. And after the 15th century, most of these original primary sources were destroyed, including an incomprehensible amount of knowledge of our human history prior to the 1400s. Many are aware that the Crusades were the militant arm for the New World. The question is, who were they actually fighting? And what were they really determined to destroy? After this, these books and Bibles were replaced with the translations from the newly invented Latin, Hebrew, and Greek languages, simply derivations of this older form of Arabic. This may sound ridiculous to those hearing it for the first time, but there is a significant amount of proof to support these claims. Could it be that this older Arabic is actually a European language? The modern languages are but Pig Latin based on different mathematical codes deriving from one source language, variations with slight alterations for each language that come from a single language. Was the Tower of Babel in the Middle Ages? It's commonly accepted that the Romance languages evolved from Vulgar Latin, a version of Latin said to have been spoken by the common people of the Roman Empire. Yet, curiously, Latin ceased to be a spoken language by around the 7th century, according to mainstream historical timelines. Despite this, Latin remained the dominant written language in scholarly, religious, and administrative contexts well into the 18th century. This enduring use, spanning over a millennium without native speakers, raises significant questions about its practicality and the narrative we've been presented. Why would Latin persist as a lingua franca for academics and clergy if there were no native speakers for such an extended period? The explanation is that it facilitated communication across different linguistic regions and served ecclesiastical and academic purposes, which is overly complex and somewhat impractical. After all, managing a vast array of scholarly and religious works in a language that no one spoke natively seems not only cumbersome, but also inefficient. Could it be, then, that the sustained use of Latin was not merely for convenience, but a part of a more deliberate strategy? Consider the possibility that Latin was maintained as a scholarly tool, not for the sake of tradition, but as a means for the Vatican to exert control over the dissemination of knowledge. By centralizing scholarly works in Latin, the church could have effectively monopolized education and the interpretation of text, from scripture to scientific treatises. Latin, quite literally, is pig Latin. Taking a look, it appears that Latin was artificially constructed by reversing the Etruscan script. The Etruscans wrote right to left, similar to Arabic, and the official narrative says that it was derived from the Greek alphabet. However, what if the Etruscans and early Greeks are the same people? It could be the same way that modern Hebrew was developed from Arabic, ancient Greek was also derived, and to complete the trifecta, Latin was created, becoming the three linguistic pillars of the Dark Age reset. From these three reset languages, all other modern languages were born, all within a span of 1,000 years. The ancient Greek literature, thought to be created in the 16th and 17th centuries, is derived from heavily edited translations of older text into a newly invented ancient Greek language. These edited versions then became known as ancient Greek primary sources. In contrast, the actual ancient Greek language is likely what is now referred to as the Middle Greek Byzantine language, which differs significantly from modern Greek, unlike the constructed ancient Greek that closely resembles it. Leonardo da Vinci was known to write backwards, but the mainstream story is that this was to write secret messages. What if there's something else going on? He seemed comfortable writing extensive notes from right to left, something that could only be achieved with a lot of practice. Or perhaps he grew up writing this way? They say that Spanish, as it is known today, was derived from Latin. However, how could this be the case if for the majority of Spain's history, it was an Arabic-speaking country during Al-Andalus? It wasn't until the 20th century that Castilian became the main language of Spain. All the Jews in Spain during the medieval period were speaking and writing in Arabic. In fact, Judeo-Spanish is known as Ladino, which is a Romance language derived from Old Spanish. What is Ladino? Ladino is quite literally a mix between Spanish and Arabic. Soletreo is the cursive form of the Hebrew script and was used by the Sephardic Jews in Spain. This script is what was used to write Ladino. But this is what's crazy. Here's a postcard from Latin America where you can see Latin letters in handwriting form or cursive, and then we see this Ladino, which is basically Arabic. The Jews of Spain had been speaking Arabic for thousands of years. Historians will tell us that it's something completely different, but it's just Arabic. If you flip the image of the postcard with this Ladino, you can see that it's Latin reversed. It's just hard to tell because it's cursive. Cursive Latin is Arabic in reverse. This could explain what Leonardo da Vinci was writing in his backward journals. Was his writing actually backwards? Or was it an Italian form of Soletreo? Most Jews spoke Arabic throughout history. However, it is well known that Jews also spoke Yiddish. But what is Yiddish? Yiddish is a German dialect with supposedly words from Hebrew. But how could that be if no one was speaking Hebrew before the 19th century? We know modern Hebrew was created from Arabic roots. Is there a connection between Yiddish and Arabic? Quote, in Jerusalem before 1948, it was common for Yiddish-speaking Jews and Arabs to understand each other's languages, particularly in neighborhoods where the two communities abutted each other. Among Jews, it was more often women engaged in business or neighborly relations with Arabs who learned Arabic, whereas men were more often secluded in yeshivas, engrossed in the study of Hebrew and Aramaic text. Arabic was taught alongside German in the modern Sephardic schools established after 1850, and while there were attempts to integrate Arabic into the Ashkenazic institutes of learning in order to provide graduates with practical job skills, these were usually resisted by religious authorities. Nevertheless, in the 19th century there were groups of Ashkenazic men in Jerusalem who learned Arabic, both spoken and literary. End quote. So we have first-hand accounts that Yiddish-speaking people and Arabic-speaking people could understand each other's languages, and that Yiddish-speaking Jews were encouraged to learn Arabic to obtain practical job skills. Or maybe they could understand each other because both languages share a common root. It seems that modern Hebrew is a mix between modern Arabic, ancient Arabic, High Germanic, and Slavic languages, and that the term Aramaic is a blanket term that is being used to conceal the true origins of the Hebrew language, as well to hide how the Hebrew alphabet was created only 1,000 years ago at the end of the Middle Ages, not 3,000 years ago as the official narrative states. But this phenomenon of newly invented languages doesn't just affect a few languages. It seems as if the majority of people were not speaking our modern languages up until a couple hundred years ago. Quote, until about 1800, Standard German was almost solely a written language. At this time, people in urban northern Germany, who spoke dialects very different from Standard German, learned it almost as a foreign language and tried to pronounce it as close to the spelling as possible. End quote. What's strange is why were most of these Romance languages essentially not even spoken by the locals until the 19th century? How could it be that in 1861, only 2.5% of Italy's population could speak Italian? If Italian replaced Latin during the Renaissance, and they have thousands of books being written in Italian, who are reading these books if no one is speaking Italian? Sicilian has many similarities with Arabic. Many of the words are derived from Arabic roots. There is even a distinct variety of Arabic that was spoken in Sicily for centuries called Sicular Arabic. Italy also has many Arabic city names. It wasn't until schooling became mandatory that the European populace were forced to learn these new languages that are supposedly derived from Latin. The same happened with France, where in 1789, 50% could not speak French at all, and only 12% spoke it fairly well. Apparently, by 1860s, only 20% could speak modern French. Most French speakers during this time are said to have spoken Occitan, not French. Occitan is another supposed Roman language allegedly derived from Latin. Occitan has several different dialects, for example, Catalan and Valencian. However, when we take a look at these compared to Arabic, we see a striking similarity. You can even see how some words and phrases are simply flipped and altered slightly. As stated before, these prototype dialects are often associated under the blanket term Latin vulgar. Again, is this blanket term that is meant to associate these early European languages with Latin really hiding the fact that their common root was really this ancient Arabic? The question is, why would this need to be hidden to such a great extent? Could the knowledge that our languages come from an older form of Arabic be traced back to something much deeper? Mainstream history will say all of this Arabic influence is due to a myriad of Muslim invasions that spanned throughout the course of the Middle Ages. However, it becomes quite clear that the Occitan dialects are actually just dialects with alterations of Arabic. So what we have is that Spain was speaking Arabic, Germany was speaking Arabic, Italy was speaking Arabic, and France was speaking Arabic. These are the major European countries. Historians insist that the word Europe or Europa originates from Latin, and before that, from ancient Greek mythology. It's a common practice for historians to attribute many historical elements to myths. By doing so with Latin and Greek myths, they effectively obscure real historical narratives. These myths were mysteriously found after they went missing for 1,000 years. These myths were clearly invented by the people in power in order to hide and destroy the true history of the world. They wanted to show that religion copied from Latin and Greek myths. Europa, Europa, Irapa, Edaba, Edabi. The word Europa was clearly modified from Arapa or Araba. Europa, Arapa, Araba was the land of the Edabi, or the land of the teachers and rabbis, the land of the educated or enlightened. or the servants of God. Originally, a rabbi was simply a rabbi, arabe, and this had nothing to do with race or modern religions. It was simply a title for those doing the work of Allah, who at the time did not represent the demiurgic, jealous God of the Abrahamic religions today. The original Allah more closely represented a universal oneness that inspired people to create amazing things and to live in harmony with the natural world. To be clear, this video is not a promotion of modern Islam. It's more so an investigation into a specific concept. That there was an ancient form of Arabic that was not a Middle Eastern Semitic language, but is actually a European language. It's the language of the Germans and Jews, what some historians have labeled as the Aryan race. This Arabic is not the same as modern Arabic, but most likely is an older lost form of Arabic that was a mix between Gaelic and Arabic. Supposed ancient Phoenician is simply early Irish Celtic. In the 18th century, historians discovered exciting proof of Phoenician Celtic ties. An ancient Roman dramatist, Titus Massius Plautus, wrote a play, The Penniless, in which he placed the current Phoenician into the speech of one of his characters. In the 18th century, linguists noticed the great similarity between that Phoenician and the early Irish Celtic language. Sir John says, quote, "The Celtic Cymry were for some time indifferently called Cambria or Cumbria. The Welsh word on which they are based being, as now written, Cymru, and is there pronounced nearly as an Englishman would treat it if spelled Cymru or Cymru. As students of Old Testament history will know, Cymru or Cymru was the name of the Israelites in Assyrian text." End quote. In 1847, the peak of the Irish potato famine, an Irish doctor in Istanbul asked Ottoman Sultan Abdul Majid I to send aid. He obliged, sending 3 ships of grain to Drogheda port, north of Dublin. The grateful city put the Turkish star and crescent on its crest, where it still remains. It appears too on the Drogheda United jerseys. Although Celtic languages and Semitic languages belong to separate language families, they share numerous typological similarities. The mainstream explanation for these similarities is that the ancestors of prehistoric Irishmen hailed from the area around contemporary Levant and migrated across the southern Mediterranean, making the modern-day Irish genetic cousins of ethnic Arabs from the Levant. Or that the Phoenicians colonized Ireland in ancient times. However, what if the mainstream story, like much of this info, is in reverse? That civilization actually migrated west to east, and not east to west as we've been told in the official narrative. There are many word similarities such as butterfly and sugar. The Ogham stone, a key to Ireland's earliest form of writing carved into upright stones, bears parallel inscriptions in Kufic Arabic and Egyptian hieroglyphics. If you compare Kufic Arabic to Irish Ogham, there's some similarities. It's just that Kufic has gaps in between the letters. However, they both have the straight and angular strokes. And if we look at this Phoenician script, it looks as if it could be the missing link between Ogham and Arabic type script. There is also square Kufic, which is very bizarre. It basically looks like an ancient QR code. This is used in ornamental decoration and can actually be read. For example, look at the square Kufic for Muhammad. If we read between the lines, we can actually see a swastika in the center. It's strange to consider that the same symbol used for the Aryans happens to be Muhammad in square Kufic. There are also many similarities between Gaelic and Etruscan. Here's a list comparing the two. Some even believe that Etruscan may have sounded very similar to Gaelic. The Etruscans were the Irish. Quote, Monsieur Gebelin, who is called by Colonel Valency a great luminary of learning, says the Greek or Pelasgian before the time of Homer and Hesiod sprung from the Celtic, and from the same Celtic, the Latin and Etruscan, all facts which, think cannot be disputed. From Godfrey Higgins. End quote. From Michael Tessarian, quote, scholars have proven the Pelasgians, Etruscans, Dorians, and Phoenicians to have been one and the same people, or at least intimately connected. These races were of Irish ancestry. The only thing that makes them different from the Irish is their location. They were not, as fraudulent historians insinuate, from the East. They merely temporarily resided there. End quote. Quote, Dr. Clark has given a coin which he says is evidently Phoenician. On one side is an inscription in the Phoenician language, but in Etruscan characters, which proves the Phoenicians and Etruscans were the same people. Godfrey Higgins. End quote. The Irish sun god was known as Iessa or Essa. Jesus is still referred to as Essa in the Quran and was known by that name to both the Arabs and the Copts. In northern India, Iessa is remembered as Issa or Essa. From this word, we derive essence, essene, and esoteric, etc. Other versions of the name are Hesu, Isis, and Asar that meant he who creates or brings the fire. Another interesting connection between Celtic and Arabic is the Celtic knot. This can be seen in art, architecture, and even scripts. These are known as endless knots, characterized by their looping, seamless lines, and appear in a range of mediums, from the stonework of Celtic art and architecture to the ornate carvings of Arabic mosque and even the detailed scrollwork in Chinese temples and manuscripts. This design, which is well known as an Irish symbol, can be found in several mosques in Turkey and in Spain. Likewise, the Chinese mystic knot, which also features an unending loop, parallels the Celtic knot in both form and function. We have covered the Chinese-Celtic connection in China unveiled. However, one interesting thing to notice is that the Manchu language bears a resemblance to Arabic. It is said to be derived from the Syriac alphabet. However, if we simply turn Manchu 90 degrees, it looks exactly like Arabic.